Okay, welcome folks. Thank you all so much for joining us today. My name is Jess. I'm with Critical Resistance. We have a really wonderful panel here today for you all. And just a note, if you are an ASL interpreter and you are in the attendee room, please send us a direct message so we can bring in our second interpreter. And a few housekeeping notes is that I know many of us are familiar with Zoom and what happens in these platforms today. We do have it on webinar view. We are streaming to Facebook Live and also recording. We have some people keeping an eye on the chat. So if you have questions, you can drop questions into the chat and we will do our best to tend to those. And without further ado, let's get started. So thank you again for joining us for Making Abolition Irresistible, a webinar on abolitionist organizing and arts practice hosted by Critical Resistance. This webinar event is part of the Imagine Freedom Artworks for Abolition online exhibition and benefit art auction. We invite you to join us for the rest of the events this month and to support. So please learn more, RSVP, and make a donation if you are willing at imaginefreedom.art. That is the website. All of the information will be there, and we'll drop that into the chat later so you can follow up. We're here today to listen and learn from some longtime critical resistance movement partners and collaborating artists about their approach to art and organizing praxis. My name is Jess Haney. I am currently on staff as development director at Critical Resistance and have the humbling opportunity to work with these artists and organizers in developing the Imagine Freedom series and benefit auction. There is a whole committee of folks who is making this lift go. So I want to thank the curatorial and planning committee. I want to thank the folks who are on tech here today and all of our presenters, contributing artists, and host committee members. So Alex, can you click to the next slide? Today, we're in the intro and welcome portion. I will share a little bit about critical resistance, cultural work, art, and abolition. Then we have speaker presentations from our amazing artists. We'll take a 5-minute break and we'll return for discussion. We have extended the discussion portion to go past 5:30 PST time to 6 p.m. If you are able to stay, we invite you to stay, but all of the presentations will happen in the beginning of the discussion during the 1.5 hour time period. And then we'll close out and give you information about next events. Again, if you're just joining us, you can use the chat function to send us messages if you have questions as a participant. And we, let us know if there's any challenges with audio or viewing ASL interpretation. And if you are an ASL interpreter and are in the audience, but are supposed to be backstage, send us a message and we'll bring you over. Great. Next slide. So today we're happy to host some great organizer artists, and we just want to share with you who is on the call today. We have Melanie Cervantes of Dignidad, Rebelde, and Justseeds, who is also a critical resistance community advisor. Next. We have a video contribution from Fernando Marti, who is also an artist, cooperative owner of Justseeds, a printmaker, a painter, and a wonderful propaganda producer for our movement. Next. We have Ashley Hunt, videographer, photographer, and faculty at Cal Arts, longtime CR contributing supporter. Next. We have Gloria Galvez, former CR Los Angeles chapter member, artist, and food justice organizer. We have Kai Lumumba Barrow, CR, Critical Resistance co-founder and current community advisor and founder of Gallery of the Streets. Next. And Kate DeCiccio, a muralist, printmaker, and artist of beautiful materials for our movement. So those are the speakers we'll be hearing from today. And to start us off, we wanted to offer some basics for how critical resistance considers art and abolition. So in this slide here, we see critical resistance's theory of abolitionist change. It's a three-pronged framework: dismantle, change, build. Prison industrial complex abolition as a political vision and strategic practice requires the work of dismantling, changing, and building. And what we mean by those three terms, most simply, is dismantling oppressive and punitive systems, practices, and tools. So stopping jail expansion, ending urban shield, eliminating a police unit, ending a policy, changing power and living conditions, building solutions to harm and systems of life-affirming support and care, building strong movements, building connections, relationships with each other that will outlast and outwit the prison industrial complex. And this is not a linear framework. It's all three things happening at once. So we struggle to change and build as we tear down. So as we are fighting jail expansion, we're building up the leadership and capacity of communities to fight. We are changing common sense about whether a jail is still a jail if it has mental health tagged in front of it. All of these things are happening, and we are deploying them simultaneously in our work. So it is a three-part holistic framework. And this image is a contribution from one of the Imagine Freedom contributing artists, Leslie Lopez, also known as Dime. And you can see her work on the 4400 Telegraph building in Oakland, across from East Side Arts Alliance, and you can hear from her. Those are two different buildings, so some of her mural work in East Oakland, and you can hear from her on the artist webinar with KQED tomorrow evening. Next slide. So a bit about cultural work, art, abolition, and critical resistance. Cultural work and art has been a part of CR since our beginning conference in 1998. Conference and event programs regularly include cultural and art programming through film, poetry, music, dance, celebration, design, art builds for mobilizations, banner and poster making, painting, and theater. And shout out to some of the speakers here today who have been lead organizers on these projects. We also know that art is one vehicle for a prefigurative and affirmative politics. So it is a way that we are envisioning the destination, the philosophy that we are enacting through abolition. It is a way of imagining where we are trying to go and what the world will look like. It has been used throughout CR's history, campaigns, and projects, and in the political interventions we make in the anti-PIC movement. So we integrate this into our organizing as best we can as we go along. Next slide. So CR stance, art as a liberatory tool for PIC abolition. So there's a multifold challenge or a set of opportunities with artistry in that we pose to artists and collaborators. Visuals are a form of communication that can be used to fortify our will to struggle, to lay bare the contradictions, and to envision what we want. Art becomes a strategy when we engage with art and visuals tactically. So towards what end are we making a mural? What is the messaging? Who is involved in the making of it, in the developing of it? In whose hands does it sit after it's made? Those can all be integrated into campaign and project planning. We do this by making images of freedom, or making images of freedom exercises for our imagination to do the visioning that abolition requires. So art is an opportunity for answer the questions of what instead of a jail, right? What resources, what relationships, how would the world feel? Art is a way to enliven those pathways. And abolitionist art, we want to use to imagine what the world we want looks like, to imagine a better future and a process of struggle to get there in the here and now. So we use visual art as a tool in service of our mission and to illustrate our theory of change. Our visual messages and framing are always focused on liberation and resistance, striving towards freedom, if not already free. So in other ways, like no handcuffs unless being broken, no bars unless being broken. You know, even if it is not a future without cops, how are people victors over, or, you know, having victory struggle against the police? We want to make PIC abolition irresistible, beautiful. We do that by representing people and community as strong, stable, and healthy as actors of power and dignity. And our visuals do not extend the life or scope of the prison industrial complex. We're disrupting the narrative and vision of the PIC by decentralizing those tools, imaging them as broken, and people as active, empowered subjects with dignity. And we elevate collective resistance. So art is a site to envision and show people working together. Next slide. So here are just some examples of art and campaigns and projects. And Alex, you can click through these. So these propaganda tools flex our collective imagination, visioning, and collective healing at events and actions. We may do this through campaign propaganda, posters, flyers, banners. And we use this visual information in political education materials. So these are things to study and to make and gather meaning from. Cool. So with that, I want to welcome our first presenter, Melanie Cervantes, CR Community Advisor, member of Dignidad, Rebelde, and Justseeds, and prolific printmaker.
Hi, everyone. I wanted to start by saying I might be a little fidgety. I think I pulled my back yesterday moving some things. So if you see me wiggling around, that's why. I also just wanted to acknowledge and pay respect to the fact that I'm zooming in from Ohlone territory. I think I've particularly deepened my appreciation for what it means to be a guest here, particularly during the pandemic, and what it means to have safety, some relative safety in place here. And I thank the Ohlone ancestors, but also the living, breathing, thriving, and future of Ohlone people for that. So I am one half of a project called Dignidad Rebelde. It's my partner, Jesus. We're working at a studio. And we started this project in 2007, and both of us came out of both supporting a lot of youth organizing, but also having had ethnic studies central to our education and ability to understand our experiences with language and frameworks in schooling. So I think, you know, when I really talk about like what my underlying politics are rooted in, it's in firsthand experiences, being, you know, a Chicana in a working class, working poor family, growing up in Southern California. A lot of that is particularly what shapes my perspective. And I think at the intersection, when we work together, Jesus and I work with a lot of different organizations. A lot of what has happened in our particular histories have also shaped what we see as potential solutions and visions for a better world. And a lot of the ways that I think our politics come through is definitely through an ethnic studies lens. You know, I think neither of us for a long time had any formal artistic training. You know, we learned from other people more on a like Skillshare level, and have largely leaned upon the bit of kind of like understanding that we gained in our formal education, and more so working with, which really start off as our friends and comrades who are organizing, to really kind of act as a visual amplification of the organizing goals, the activities of the organizations. And these are just a couple of examples, I think kind of more in the educational realm. And a lot of our work is abolitionist in its politic. And again, you know, when I really think about it, most of that really comes from direct experiences growing up, you know, as a young person, and just seeing the injustices, both that impacted me directly, but also like, you know, friends and family around us and extended family, and the ways in which that disrupted the dignity, the peace, and just the right to live free of harm that is inflicted by the state in all the different kind of facets that it has, and all the institutional reach that it has. I don't know, I apologize for the email in the middle of the screen. I don't know how to get rid of it. Anyways, so in the work, I think one of the practices that's really key and is invisible is our decisions around like who we partner with and how we do the work together. And I think kind of bottom line for us really is about whether or not our politics are aligned, and whether or not we are in a long-term transformational relationship. We have moved away from doing transactional collaborations, you know, where maybe someone wants, you know, they've seen work that we do, but we don't really have kind of this depth of investment, or like, you know, the strategies and politics. I think as an example, like, you know, there might be like a reformist organization that wants to do some work around incarceration, but like, you know, the strategies and politics don't line up with kind of with a long-term goal of abolition. Like we would choose not to enter into a partnership like that. And I think that has come with time and experience to get really kind of a lot of clarity on how we use our time, because we see time as the most precious contribution that we have to making change. And so when we create materials in order to kind of support larger movement goals, I think that for us is the most critical contribution that we can give, is that contribution of time and the experiences that we've had in doing this work. And I think, you know, in addition, there's like the fact that we are doing, you know, political printmaking. It's nothing new. We're, you know, like we're just carrying on a tradition that has been, particularly, I think, when you think of like the hemispheric practices of like raza, indigenous folks, like the use of political graphics has been just historically very present in our community. And so we really see what we're doing as sustaining that tradition. And so we do that. And one aspect of that is even using the work to both amplify the politic, but then also like raise funds for the necessary work of the organization. So, you know, we use multiple strategies in order to support this work, you know, that it's not, you know, singular or flat, but that there's multiple ways that we can engage in order to support and advance closer toward the kind of outcomes that we hope to see in our lifetimes, and if not, you know, definitely in the lifetimes of the children. I mean, I think of my nieces and nephews every time I'm engaging. Like, it helps to land not just in the short term or even the medium term, but in that longer term of like, I see this as generational work, and how can, you know, for me, leaving work that can seed the kind of changes that I would like to see happen in their lifetime. You know, they're like 5 and 8 is really critical to me, because I know this is long-term work, and I also know that sometimes we see an acceleration in movement, you know, and I think that's what we're experiencing right now. Like, it's a very turbulent time, and it's ripe with opportunity to really keep pushing the politic and keep advancing the demands that we have as a community of abolitionists and people who believe in abolition. And I think I will just close in saying that, you know, in doing the work, I think for us, we see all of these different issues as interconnected. You know, really kind of like all of these issues that kind of impact what it means to live well, you know, to live a healthy, robust life filled with dignity and, you know, full human potential. And so that is also a critical aspect for us, is really being able to connect the dots between issues that might not seem on the surface as addressing abolition, but which clearly, when you connect the dots, are critical to people being able to live those lives well. I think that's it.
Thank you so much, Melanie. A beautiful presentation. Manny has dropped into the chat a link to Dignidad Rebelde, and we encourage you to go there to shop and to acknowledge that work, should you use it or credit it. In addition to their time, the materials they make are such beautiful resources for the movement, and we want Jesus and Melanie to get due credit for all the materials that they make in the world. Our next contributor is Fernando Marti, who is a artist owner of the Justseeds cooperative. This is the opening segment of a longer interview with Fernando, which we'll share online after this webinar. And we'll be sharing the intro of his piece, and then you will be able to view later online a portfolio walkthrough with him giving information and background to all of the images, how he made them and who he made them for. So Alex, can you cue up the video? We don't have audio yet, Alex. So when you go to share screen, be sure to select the option, maybe exit share screen. And then when there's a pop-up box, a little caret, and you'll share the audio with, there's a box to click share audio too.
Oops. Title that you, thank you for having me here. I really like the title that you sent me, Making Abolition Irresistible, and you know, the quote that it comes from, the Tarnike Bambara quote, as a culture worker who belongs to an oppressed people, my job is to make revolution irresistible. And I think that really, defines how many of us who are activist artists see our work. That, in thinking about how much of the struggle around abolition is a fight against what seems to be this irresistible ideology that things need to be a certain way. And our job is to break that down and show that things can be another way and will be another way. And so I think that's really inspiring to me. And in any case, Jess, you sent me some questions. I don't know if you want me to just start off with like answering some of those questions. Seems like a good way. Okay. One of the things that all of us learn from other artists in the past, other workers. I think, for myself, I didn't go to art school. I went to school to study architecture, which I don't really do now, but I work in housing politics mostly. But I learned kind of art skills by just copying comic books. And that was, as a kid, that's kind of what I did. I love comic books. I love copying that as kind of a, both because it's fun, but it's just very accessible. Right? So I think that's sort of stayed with me, is how we make artwork that is super accessible and popular. And then as I learned more about the work that people had done, certainly I think kind of my heroes include like Posada in Mexico, creating these broadsides that used skeletons and palacas and calaveras to make fun of the ruling classes and to support the revolution. Later, in kind of one of my personal kind of stylistic heroes is an artist named Rene Medeiros, who was part of OSFAL, Cuba's Tricontinental, their work creating international solidarity, and being able to create, to create art about these liberation struggles in this beautiful, colorful way. And then as a practice, I think for a lot of us who are in this work, I think many of us, there's so many histories and lineages, but certainly one of the points to me is the Atelier Popular in Paris, and sort of thinking about these artists who were questioning what their role was in the midst of an uprising, and how you relate to workers in the middle of an uprising. What is your relationship, and the role of autonomy, and the role of propaganda, the role of creating culture and creating media. And so, I think for a lot of us, so I came up becoming a printmaker and doing silk screens. I learned from a group called the SF Print Collective that was doing a lot of street art in the early 2000s. And now sort of, figuring how to turn these skills into social media memes, and always trying to figure out how you get messages across. So that's a little bit of like kind of introduction. I think, as I said before, this idea of making abolition irresistible is really about transforming culture and transforming ideology. So I brought a little quote from Amilcar Cabral. It says, "Culture is simultaneously the fruit of a people's history and a determinant of history, by the positive or negative influence which it exerts on the revolution of relationships between people and their environment, and among people or groups of people within a society, as well as among different societies. And so that sort of the culture that we draw from, that is kind of pre-existing, that's been colonized and shaped by capitalism, shaped by the prison industrial complex. We're trying to break apart and create new cultures. It's deep and long work. Sometimes, I sort of question myself. And, we're creating images, we're creating artwork. It's not about that specific image, however great it might be, or reshared as it may be. But I think the sum of all of us doing this work is what begins to change culture. So I don't know if you want to ask me any questions or just.
Thank you, Alex, for queuing up that video. So Manny dropped into the chat a link to Justseeds. Fernando is one of the artists whose work you can find there. And like I said, we will be sharing out the full video. So we just had to splice out before we went to the portfolio walkthrough. So stay tuned for that video, and definitely check out justseeds.org to learn more about Fernando's work. Next, we have Ashley Hunt. Ashley Hunt has been a friend of Critical Resistance for decades, beginning with his first contribution of a video commemorating the Attica Uprising at our CR East Regional Conference in 2001. Since then, Ashley has helped produce interviews, videos, newspapers, and events with Critical Resistance, train students, and send new abolitionist organizers our way, and scheme on how to make abolition irresistible. Ashley, we pass to you.
Thank you so much. Thanks for everybody making this possible today, and hello to everybody who's watching out in Zoom land. I am so struck by how much I wouldn't have known whether or not Fernando was actually live or not on the Zoom. And I think I actually think there's something about this moment politically that's really interesting can be really interesting to us in thinking about how much we are in and out of time with each other in new and particularly really radical ways, starting with the kind of suspension of the capitalist work clock for so many that's allowed the kind of protest movements to be even more fierce and continuous than they might have had to be otherwise. But I just think there's some really rich things there to think about. And so one of the things that I maybe thought about that I would say about the kind of artwork I think about making, knowing the different kinds of artworks that also are out there and precede me and are doing amazing work that isn't maybe the work that I would do, or the work that I would do as well, or is work from a different position than my own. I try to think about what images do other than just simply show something, and that images and artworks also have a kind of organizing function to them. And I think I mean I was thinking about part of what Melanie was saying as well, that made me think about this in relation to who she and Dignidad Rebelde choose to collaborate with and work with. I think that that's a way of understanding that the work doesn't just show stuff, and it's not just art on the face, and that's what it means, but that it actually circulates and moves resources around institutionally, personally, collectively, and that's an important thing to understand. That can be as important to understand in terms of thinking about what an artwork does as what it might show, or what kind of medium it's in, or things like that. But I was also thinking about, I really loved how Jess said at the introduction that one of the goals is to outwit the prison industrial complex. And I had never thought about that term of trying to outwit the prison industrial complex, but there is something that I think I've been thinking about for many years in terms of trying to create images and ways of representing the prison industrial complex and resistance against it that maybe frustrates the prison industrial complex's own narcissistic desire to see itself represented. So also in Jess's idea that that she was saying around not showing bars or handcuffs unless they're being broken and so forth, there's a particular resistance to the kind of visual world that the prison industrial complex wants to force upon us and make us think is the only way to see, or the only world that we might see as possible. So what I've just finished a new work, and I'm going to show a few things from there. And this is a work that is just opening in, has just opened last week in New York. And it's a new piece that engages with ideas around Rikers Island and its scheduled closure coming up, thinking beyond it and interviewing a number of different abolitionist organizers and activists. So I'm just going to show the first couple of minutes of that video and then show one other part to go with it. So I'm hoping my screen share skills are working here. Let's see here. I assume someone will chat at me if nothing's working.
So what is abolition? Abolition is making the world anew. Abolition is, as I often say to people, the requirement to change one thing, which is everything. But we change everything by making something new out of what already exists. And it's kind of difficult for some folks at the outset to say, well, how do we make something new if we're using something old? And the answer is to think about how we can arrange things like people and places and materials and buildings and opportunities and ways of relating to each other in new ways, such that we've destroyed old social relationships, but we haven't destroyed each other.
Okay, and I think that in order to show a next screen, I have to move to another screen. Are we able to see the So okay, great, thanks. So one of the ways in which I came to this project, which kind of tells a history of Rikers Island in New York, while also imagining, kind of looking back at Rikers Island's history, but from a future in which it no longer exists. And the bulk of the imagery from it, except for some archival material that I've worked with, is shooting the kind of naturalized landscape that is on the shores around the Upper East River, from points at which you can see Rikers Island across the river, but without directly looking at Rikers Island for the most part, and instead focusing on the kind of plant life and ecology that would presumably grow up and replace it. One of the ways in which I came to this was from this image here, which is of the what people call the Old Atlanta Prison Farm, which closed down, I think, in 1991. And when I was showing a project, this particular project, Degrees of Visibility, for the first time in Atlanta back in 2016, someone had told me about this, and I thought I would go photograph it. And I thought, while I was photographing this kind of empty ruin of a prison, I thought to myself, what does it mean to photograph a prison when it's empty? And then it occurred to me that it's actually not empty, that it's actually full and filled with life, and a kind of fugitive life that's completely unauthorized by the prison industrial complex or the prison itself, and has taken over and is thriving and is not shaped to what the prison system itself wants. So that's what kind of led to my interest in showing this, portraying Rikers through a kind of storytelling that doesn't show you Rikers. And the other thing I'll just show you quickly that has been a part of my my ongoing work. This is a still from that project of Rikers. And this is, I've been making newspapers that I publish and have for visitors to exhibitions to take away with them as they come to the exhibition, and have them kind of made in collaboration with different community and activist groups on the ground who are local to wherever that exhibition is. So in terms of what an artwork can organize, also thinking about how the resources that I have in relation to this particular exhibition or something, an institution and so forth, can kind of move my voice out of the way and open up other voices, a space for other voices, a platform for organizing in addition. So this is the voice that you heard in that video at the beginning there is Ruth Wilson Gilmore, who of course is one of the founders of Critical Resistance and a mentor to many of us. And this also begins with a sort of postscript interview with Ruthie about what I've kind of named here the carcerality of COVID-19. And as you read that, there's also images that have been contributed by a few different organizations like the RAP campaign, Release Aging People in Prison in New York. There's also the Abolitionist platform toward healthy communities and beyond COVID-19 that CR, I think, helped spearhead. And then also some other artworks from some other artists. This is Shayna Agid right here, this print, Free Them All. And then also some values, principles, and practices listed from the New York City Transformative Justice Hub. And the idea is that, of course, that as in addition to counting the artwork that I've put together, there's also kind of arrows that point out from the artwork towards other community resources and organizing that people can get involved in, and hoping that the work will help to do that. And then it's all kind of framed with these images that are blocking the camera, where trees are blocking the camera's view of Rikers from different points around the bay there. So those are my thoughts. Thank you very much for including me today.
Thank you, Ashley. Manny has dropped into the chat a link for more of Ashley's work, and through the Q&A function, I dropped in some information about an upcoming show that the video is part of. Ashley, is the video available to be viewed in full online yet, or is that in relation to the show?
That I'm figuring out with the show right now, so it will be. So at some point, I'm just not sure when yet. Actually, why don't we should maybe make something available for CR folks to be able to watch it. Maybe we can work that out in addition to the show. we can work on that after the call.
Oh, great. Thank you for the question, Viju. Next up, we have Gloria Galvez. Gloria met Critical Resistance Los Angeles through her organizing with the Youth Justice Coalition. As a CR member, Gloria helped plan mobilizations and campaign strategy in the campaign to stop women's jail construction in Los Angeles, which many years after Gloria's involvement in the chapter achieved full victory, defeating women's jail construction in LA. Gloria has also helped plan political education events, such as an International Women's Day event and a Sada Shakur teach-in at Chuco's Justice Center. She has also invited us to co-curate an installation and series of events in 2019 at the Women's Center for Creative Work in LA. And that show was the seed of a new CR archival show, which will be opening at UC Santa Cruz online this fall, adjacent to the Barring Freedom exhibition. Gloria, we pass it to you.
Mute myself. Thank you. I'm gonna just share my screen with you guys. Cool, and it is loading. Let me start from the beginning, actually. Great, I think you all can see this. If you don't, please stop me. And so I want to begin with how it all began. And so I want a specific project and moment that began my path as a political artist and community organizer. I think I froze a bit. Hopefully you all can still hear me. And that moment is this moment here. And it's specifically surrounding this like bear that's in the background. We'll talk about the bear more, but first some context for the image. So what's in this image is a community action in support of Alex Sanchez. And this was a community action in 2009. And Alex Sanchez, who is a community peacekeeper and co-founder of Homies Unidos, at the time, Alex was incarcerated and he was facing some charges that the community saw as false charges. And so in response to defend him and to activate and tell his real story, folks got together and organized a series of actions. And at the time, I was a youth organizer with the Youth Justice Coalition, which is an org that works to challenge the treatment of young people within the prison industrial complex and to transform that treatment and abolish the entities that are dehumanizing them and making them disposable. And so as an organizer for the YJC, I was like given the opportunity to like participate in building this like bear that we used for the action. And this bear was like a bear that we like all of the youth organizers and some of the high school students like together built out this bear, and we paper mache'd it, and we built some of the images that some of the poster boards that were used along with the bear, which is like you can see like a little zoom in of it, which is this like we can't bear this anymore type of bear. And for me, this experience was the first time that I had ever seen like art used as a political tool, and I was really like touched and changed by the whole experience, and also really also touched and changed by the experience of art being used as a political tool, but of people getting together and organizing and like defending each other and taking care of each other and telling our stories that the system often tries to like obscure or distort. So we also did some masks that people would wear, that wore during the action, and people had signs that said, "We are all Alex Sanchez." So now I'm gonna fast forward to today, like where all of this stands today. So 11 years after that action, here I wanna share this image of a screening that I had at Mutual Aid Action Los Angeles, who is also known through the name of their sister org, Revolutionary Autonomous Communities. They are collectives that are working for food justice and making food accessible to folks who don't have access to food, healthy foods, and just like food on a daily basis. So this here specifically, I did a screening of a cartoon film that I worked on titled Life in an Open Air Prison. And in the cartoon, what the cartoon does, it connects, it makes a connection between social, political, racial, and economic structures of the status quo, between these structures and specifically these structures within the banana market. And it makes a connection to the idea of a carceral society. And so I have some images of the cartoon that I'll show you in a second. But what this cartoon, we had a screening and we had banana themed foods, and we watched the film and we talked about the film, and we talked about how the film connected to our own lives, whether it was through having access to healthy foods or the types of foods we had access to or what we didn't have access to. And these are some of the film stills from the film. And so one thing that I like, one ending note on the film is that I saw this film as like a political education project. I had some experiences where I was talking to young people about the Banana Republic, and they were like, "You mean the store, the clothing store?" And I was like, "No, like Banana Republic as in the historical like thing that happened in Latin America, of American companies going into Latin America and creating chaos and exploitation and so on, and the resistance that happened in response to that too." And so that's where this film was born out of like building an educational project that gave us the time and the space to like talk about this history and also process it and connect it to our day-to-day experiences. In addition to screening the film that day, we also talked about a political prisoner of Honduras. He's out now, but at the time, Edwin Espinal was incarcerated on like false charges, and what his community was seeing these charges as was as an attack on their movement for sovereignty and like land rights and freedom for the people. And so we talked about his specific situation, and we also talked about how the Banana Republic and the banana market was tied to the conditions that the people of Honduras were facing at the moment. So with Mala, aka RAC, the groups, I have worked with them. I have a really long-term relationship with them. And I also organized things that were not centering my work. I organized things that centered other people's work, which I saw as like transformative, that I saw contained transformative ideas or just transformative images that could inspire people. And so here is a flyer to a show that I organized for Mala, which was installed within their community center, which is like a food store slash food pantry slash thrift store slash hangout space for community folks. And we just installed the TVs like within the thrift store and like made it a part of the layout of the thrift store. And so the theme of this show was specific to imagining a life outside of capitalism. So all the works that were presented within this show touched upon that idea. So right now, what I'm doing with Mala and RAC is I'm fundraising for them. I'm using a print that I created for an artist lecture, and I'm now turning that print into a print that we are selling, and we're selling it to raise funds to create a first aid resource rack and just resource team for folks who are houseless. And I think that one of the facts that has made my art collaboration with Mala possible is the fact that I have like a in-depth relationship with them. I think this for me is really important, and this relationship sometimes is in the form of organizing for them. There's a picture of me holding agendas for like a meeting that I printed to, an organizing meeting that I went to and like printed the agendas for. Sometimes that in-depth relationship is manifested in the way that we collaborate and how I spend time with them discussing, like, oh, like for instance, for the banana film, we spent time discussing what the film was about, like how it related to people. And that's how the political ed teach-in about Edwin came up. Is one of the lead organizers there suggested doing the teach-in to connect it to like an actual current movement for justice. So I feel like these in-depth relationships are what allow me to continue being like a political artist. And also I would say that they're, in a sense, they have built like a framework for me of like building deep with people as opposed to like building wide and like working with a ton of people. Like a lot of the collaborations that I have done in the past year have been with Mala or Critical Resistance. And yeah, and I'm just interested in continuing to build with those groups and learning from them and like being held accountable and staying accessible to them. So just like briefly, like how does my food justice work tie into my abolition work, is that back in the days when I was like first a new member to Critical Resistance, I did this like exercise that broke down the prison industrial complex via concentric circles. And these circles, like in each of the circles, we like marked down like what are the things that the prison industrial complex is, like how does it work, like what are the tools that it uses, like what are the conditions that like allow for it to happen. And for me, like, you know, I was able to see that like abolition work is these campaigns too that we do within critical resistance, but it's also like establishing a food center and organizing to make sure people have access to food, or make sure people have access to a job, or make sure people have access to health. So for me, I was able to tie how my different types of political organizing were connected. And just like on an ending note, I wanted to like, I guess, emphasize like 3 points of what I feel of my political abolitionist art practices and that I feel like are important to me. Like the 3 points within it is like, I guess like the first one is that I often just make images and things based on like pure inspiration and passion when I feel really passionate about a movement or about an idea or about a way I want the world to shift towards. And I'll just make like those things. But in addition to making things, I also collaborate with people and like make my skills or my economic resources or any sort of resources I have, I make them available to them. And sometimes these collaborations are like, are based on just like ideas that they want to see happening in the world, and I center their ideas. Or sometimes I approach folks with an idea and I'm like, hey, like I'm interested in doing this, are you interested? Here in this image, we have 2 images. In this slide, we have 2 images. The top image is this like wooden dandelion that I created when I was working for Freedom Harvest, which was a project by Dignity and Power where they took space outside of the Twin Tower jails in LA. And they created like a zone of art and healing for people who were visiting their loved ones. And together we made this dandelion. Like we talked about the vision and everything, and I worked with a fabricator and we made this dandelion. And the dandelion, basically people would come up to it and tie their wishes for their loved ones, their wishes for the world, their wishes, their abolitionist wishes. So yeah, they were like making wishes before they entered to visit their loved ones, and keeping that hope alive and remembering it at like such a crucial point, like when they were visiting their loved ones. At the bottom image, so this is a picture of Free LA High School, which is a high school that was founded by the Youth Justice Coalition. And Free LA High School is like a high school that works with young people who are pushed out from traditional schools, or who are coming back home from juvie, or whom are just like not getting their needs met in traditional schools. So recently, like I've been in conversation with them about a education / like art installation that the students and I are going to work on together. And what this installation is going to do is we're going to like make visual interventions that are going to be placed throughout their space that allow and push people to think about the ways their bodies are taking up room in the physical spaces, and also the materials that are surrounding them, the actual materials, like their chemical breakdown or their historical breakdown, their labor breakdown. So in a sense, it's like building their spatial consciousness as they traverse through these spaces.
Claudia,
And yeah,
would you be willing to bring us to a close in the next minute or so?
yes, this is the last slide actually. And this last slide, it is what this is another aspect to my practice is that I organize events. These are 2 events that I have organized. The first one, Practicing Abolition, which was actually done in collaboration with Ashley Hunt. For this event, I did facilitate a conversation with artists where folks took time to reflect on how the prison industrial complex was present within the art world. For the second event, the Zapatista art show that I did, I invited these like these like tech activists who work with tech and social justice spaces to like facilitate a workshop where people were learning tech skills that they can apply to their movements. Okay, cool, we are done.
Thank you so much, Claudia. It's always wonderful to hear about the projects that you've been on. And Manny has dropped into the chat some examples of Claudia's collaborations and links to Youth Justice Coalition, which founded the Free LA School. Okay. Next, we have Kai Lumumba Barrow. Kai is a co-founder of CR, planner of the 2001 CR East Regional Conference, as well as other future ones, a longtime member and staffer, and currently a CR community advisor. In 2018 in Atlanta, Critical Resistance, Southerners on New Ground, also known as SONG, and Kai's current project, Gallery of the Streets, collaborated for a weekend of education, celebration, and performance, in which Kai and members of SONG presented Breach, Adventures in Heterotopia, a postmodern global funk visual opera. Prisoner number 25 travels to other spaces to get free from dystopia. And I will drop that into the chat so you all can see that. And Kai,
Rape. 2 rape cases in the 1980s. What was Inez Garcia supposed to do for the man who declared war on her body? The man who carved a combat zone between her breasts. Was she supposed to lick crabs from his hairy ass, kiss every pimple on his butt, blow hot breath on his big toe, draw back the corners of her vagina and hee-haw like a California burro? This being wartime for Inez, she stood facing the knife, the insults, and her own smell drying on the penis of the man who raped her. She stood with a rifle in her hand, doing what a Defense Department will do in times of war. And when the man started grunting and panting and wobbling forward like a giant hog, she pumped lead into his 300 pounds of shaking flesh, sent it flying to the Virgin of Guadalupe, then celebrated Day of the Dead Rapist Punk. And just what the fuck else was she supposed to do? And what was Joanne Little supposed to do for the man who declared war on her life? Was she supposed to tongue his encrusted toilet stool lips, suck the numbers off of his tin badge, choke on his claptrap balls, squeeze on his nub of rotten maggots and sing, God bless America, thank you for fucking my life away? This being wartime for Joanne, she did what a Defense Department will do in times of war. And when the piss-drinking, shit-sniffing guard said, "I'm gonna make you wish you were dead, black bitch, come here," Joanne came down with an ice pick in the SWAT freak motherfucker's chest. Yes, in the fat neck of that racist policeman, Joanne did the dance of the ice picks. And once again, from coast to coast, house to house, we celebrated Day of the Dead Rapist Punk. And just what the fuck else were we supposed to do?
At this time, this particular time, to listen to the 36 black notes of the piano. There's 36 black notes, 52 white notes. To eliminate something, don't mind. BLACK-NUSS.
Thank you, Kai.
Hey, thank you for checking us out. So I'm happy to talk about the project when we get into the conversation.
Cool. Beautiful. So that was Kai Lumumba Barrow. We have Gallery of the Streets linked in the chat. And then there's also a direct link to Breach, which we will drop into the chat shortly.
Yeah, I also want to shout out my collaborating partner, Jazz. Work together on Gallery of the Streets and that. Oh, okay. We worked together, and that was Jazz's editing. This is a first cut of multiple cuts that we're developing. So there's Jazz. Okay, bye-bye.
Awesome. So collaborator Jazz Franklin, shout out to Jazz, name dropped into the chat. So our last presenter this afternoon is Kate DeCiccio. Kate is a muralist, printmaker, and educator who creates powerful visuals in collaboration with community groups, organizations, movement mobilizations, and I would add families specifically. Kate helped create CR's 20th anniversary event poster in 2018, and I can attest to Kate's discipline and patience on working with us as a partner on that project. Kate, we pass to you.
Thank you so much. First off, I just want to say thank you for inviting me to be part of this conversation. Critical resistance has been nutrients for feeding my abolitionist mind and heart for a very long time. And so tonight I'm thinking about how to talk about my work, but also how to talk about my work in this moment in a way that feels useful. I tried to pull together kind of just a small group of slides that shows the way I approach work from an abolitionist perspective, but also how I kind of carry abolition as a politic in engaging the conversations that I think make my work possible. So let me share the screen. Okay, here we are. Yeah, so I'm an artist, educator, and cultural strategist. So my work looks a lot of different ways. Sometimes I'm like straight up working with kids, teaching them in a way that looks kind of like a traditional art educator environment. Other times I'm partnering with different organizers to really think how it is that art can be used to bring real life to their work in a way that builds relationships and new leadership, and where art making brings real spirit to the work, so that there's political outcomes, but there's cultural shift that makes the political outcomes much more broadly impactful. So first I just want to share how I think about abolition and all the work that I do. And so to me, I really think that abolition and imagination are absolutely intertwined, that nursing our imagination midwives abolition, that they really hold one another, and neither of them permit us to circumnavigate the truth of what holds us back. And so in working with communities, I always really lean into abolitionist thinking because it provides a container to really think honestly and curiously about what are the traumas and fears that are making it challenging for us to move into a future without walls. And so then when we are there, we can begin to think what healing looks like from an imaginative space. And I really think that our capacity to stand with both feet in abolition is proportional to our capacity to commit to healing the wounds our imaginative wingspan has suffered due to colonization, slavery, and the prison industrial complex. And so in all of the work that I do, you know, for me, it's very clear to me that to heal my imagination so that I can work on behalf of abolition, I must be in very honest relationship with the ways that being an 11th generation descendant of early colonizers in Massachusetts informs the limitations of how I exist in the world and the ways that my imagination has been compartmentalized as a result of what I come from. And so, you know, while healing looks different for each of us, together, it is what waters our collective future. We're able to transcend the walls that hold us back right now. My work really focuses a lot on portraiture for counter-narrative. And what that looks like in practice is sitting down with people, thinking about how they want to tell their story. How do they want to look? What's the spirit of how they want the composition to feel, or the messaging that they want to come across? On the left is the cover of the new book that just came out from 826 National. All these three young women are all from San Francisco. I did several long visioning sessions with them, talking about what it means to be a young person writing about new possibilities. And so, you know, consistently, the success of my work is really putting the decision-making into the hands of the people who I'm working with. On the right is Amanda Gorman. This piece was created as part of the We the Future project. Amanda Gorman is the first U.S. Poet Laureate, youth U.S. Poet Laureate. So it wasn't hard for her to come up with, you know, really powerful messaging. And then we just moved into like, what does this look like in an image? For a long time, I have been connected to people who are on the inside. And so sometimes I get requests to support with different campaigns to help get people out, or to help tell a story, or be in collaboration with a person on the inside. On the left is Tyra Patterson. She's out right now, but at the beginning of the I Am Tyra Patterson campaign, I was asked to create a portrait of her. And so, you know, I really think about counter-narrative in portraiture, and that we understand that the lexicon of portraits are filled with negative imagery, particularly of Black, Indigenous, people of color. And so in making portraits where people have a lot of power over the way that they are portrayed, we're diluting that space so that we're taking a sense of like reclaiming the microphone or, you know, the visual language that informs a lot of how, you know, we sense possibility. The way that we see ourselves informs a lot about what we think is possible. So on the right, this is a piece with on the right, this is a piece with Lifelines. It's an organization in Philadelphia who works with people who've been sentenced to life without parole. Phil Rosado is an incredible person who actually was sentenced to life without parole, and he runs a huge restorative justice program, first in Greater Prison, and now he's in a Phoenix prison in Pennsylvania. And I worked closely with him on this collaboration to tell the story of how many people are impacted when any one person is incarcerated. We also did a series of greeting cards illustrating, you know, the dynamics of relationships when loved ones are incarcerated. This is his godson, Dean. On the left is a collaboration with the Philadelphia Reentry Think Tank. They are a group of people returning home from prison who work with different facets of the Philadelphia government as consultants. They worked closely with public defenders, with the mayor's office, with parole, thinking about what it would look like if the system actually met people's needs. And so again, working with their team, I really sat down with each person and we talked about the way they wanted to look, the story they wanted to tell. And so this is like consistent in all of my work. We take a bunch of pictures together, we go through the photographs. The people who are being painted decide on which photograph I use to make the actual portrait. Also, like Jess mentioned, for a long time, since 2014, I've worked with families who have lost loved ones due to police terror. So this is a group of moms, except for Gwen Woods in the middle. She's Mario Woods' mother, but everyone else are LA-based moms. And I worked with them along with almost 50 other families to make the portraits of the people who've been left, largely mothers and siblings. But this is a mural that was created in Los Angeles. Another big portion of my work is this strategy work. And I do a lot of work with kids, but also just a lot of work in community and as an educator and as a strategist, thinking about what are the conversations that we have and how is it that we need to engage our imagination on behalf of abolition? We know as abolitionists more than ever before, like really taking our imagination seriously is so, so important right now. Because for many years, we've been practicing what it means to not have police. We've been practicing what we mean to not have prison. And to make that world seductive for people who are just coming to the table, I think that the more that we can spend time practicing what it is to develop abolitionist language, to really be able to articulate in our artwork visually what a just future looks like, then we can begin to move into it. And so currently, I'm currently in Richmond, Virginia, working with young people on a mural about what it looks like in a world where youth prisons no longer exist. And as part of this project, we've also been doing this other project called Transmissions from the Future, all with performing statistics. And so a lot of like what our visioning sessions look like are sitting down with young people in conversation, you know, getting like those sentence starters, like what becomes possible that isn't possible now if no kids are locked up? Who are we when we're healed? What becomes true? If police and prisons don't exist, how do we show up for one another? What does it look like when we're all in, believing in both accountability and redemption? So I'm interested in both creating artwork but also really cultivating larger communities, capacity to dream towards a world where prisons no longer exist, in both the spiritual and the physical sense, right? We understand that there's a physicality of prison, but the broadest, you know, like the large impact of prison is the way that psychologically it impacts all of us, whether that be in the ways that we are or not able to have relationships with one another, with the ways that anxiety and terror exist in our bodies. Just, you know, incarceration lives in our cells in America, and depending on the body that you live in America, the way your cells live in a sense of terror and imprisonment, it varies, but we really all need to be understanding one another and moving closer into our humanity by, I think, really thinking about these kinds of questions. In the Transmissions from the Future project, we talk with kids about, like, you know, we're going to teleport into 2080. And, you know, these are kids who are like in their 20s. And you tell them, you know, like, and you've created a world without youth prisons. And in this world, now I want you to be reflecting back. And so we talk about them like they're on your front porch and you're, you know, pushing your hair through your hand through your gray hair, and you're thinking, and so we say to them, like, you're standing at the site where you or a loved one were incarcerated. The youth prison has been demolished. What has the space transformed into? And how do you feel seeing it and knowing that you helped make this possible? And kids will talk about, like, oh my God, that, you know, oh my gosh, I think I would just cry. Or one kid in New York said, I want Rikers to be just ruins. I don't want it to change. I want to turn just Rikers to ruins, so we remember what it was like. Other kids share tons about, you know, what if we transform them into spaces where all of our needs are met? The future has to be able, others messages will be like to the kids, you know, the future you has been able to shut down youth prisons. You see kids in your community now that have a different sense of freedom. What does that freedom look like for a child who doesn't know what it means to be locked up? And we'll say these kids, like, they've never been locked up and their parents have never been locked up. And so, you know, it really creates a moment of reflection, and kids talk about, you know, really how they imagine it would feel to be in your body. Like, if you were never stressed about the police, or if you never held memories of being brutalized and feeling completely powerless and that no one was watching out for you while you're locked inside. So another big leg of my work is in thinking strategically with young people about how to make artwork that weaves together their stories as both a way to change legislature and change the prison system, but also to imagine, and for really to, like, the kids to talk about what they know that they need. So these pieces were created in summer program. In the summer, I always do this project in Richmond, Virginia, working with kids who are in detention, and the kids are the experts on a different part of the prison system, and we make artwork. So on the left was a year that we focused on the school to prison pipeline. On the right, we used all the artwork to advise on where money had been reallocated to go to a new prison for kids. And the kids, actually, we created a budget about what the kids would spend the money on. And actually the money was reallocated to the community. This is another piece.
Kate, can you aim to bring to a close in a minute or so?
Yeah, we're done.
Cool.
These last two pieces are also just part of that same project. And that's it. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Those are beautiful images, and we've dropped Kate's website into the chat. We're now going to take a 5-minute stretch break, and we'll come back at 5:39 and for some discussion and Q&A. So please stay with us, and you can drop questions you have into the Q&A function now if you'd like them on deck for when we return. Also, Alex will be sharing some slides for our pause, and we'll see you all back in 5.
The proof, wanna kill my culture in each and every root. And hell nah, I'm not afraid to die. Spirit strong, watch the thing rise. When I come back with 1 to 8 lives, it's the wrath of God, he can't take mine. A public enemy past state lines, it's a different track when I chase grind. Organized while the stakes high, with a rap sheet from here to 8 Mile. Illegal transactions through PayPal, bidding kitty for my dog to a weight trial. We still see you hate when you fake smile. Rinse dirt off with accomplishments, don't care about you competent. Trophies, we back on our honor shit. Hold on, I got them. I'm not taking the seed, the chains, we breaking them. They don't know who they playing with. Fuck with my family relationships, I'm not taking it no more. I'm not taking it no more.
In the cell, it's a living hell. Homie locked, he just wants some mail. Dead broke, he ain't make his bail. Blindfolded, trying to pin the tail. Sick and tired, so we getting higher. Hell hot, and we in the fire. Belly of the beast, and we starving. No space, we was in the parks. They throwing babies in cages. Feeling so alienated. Just like a rose in the pavement. Listen, I rose from the pavement. I'm not someone you should play with. They got me all in their playlist. Sharing that knowledge of profit you wildin' if you think you gonna replace us. This here's Henny, no chaser. Kicking that wisdom and we make it make sense. I need a meal, we dreaming and chasing. I can't be losing my patience. We put in work on vacation. We moving coast to coast, spreading the word to folks. Whether you blood or loc, we giving love and hope. I can remember the times was back, now we ahead of the line. You know wine get better with time. Since a youngin' I've been on my grind.
No, I'm not taking the seed, the chains, we breaking them. They don't know who they playing with. Fuck with my family relationships, I'm not taking it no more. I'm not taking it no more.
Report back. This is report back.
This a report back, this a report back. Giving you all facts, better call smack going off wax. This a report back, this a report back. Giving you all facts, better call smack going off wax. This a report back, this a report back. Giving you all facts, better call smack going off wax. This a report back, this a report back. Giving you all facts, better call smack going off wax. Moments like this, reason why I stay in the movement. You know it's hard to go forward, gotta keep it moving. That inner strength that's passed down, you know how we use it. Talk to the whole collective so you know the crew lit. They done build with they family so they could tune in. Heard we serving ice cream, you could get the scoop, man. We be whipping up, healing while we making music. Saving fuses, facing Uzis, talking to the shooters. Said they could change their lives before they split medullas. Oblongata from Aruga, born dodging troopers. But this street shit, man, you cannot maneuver. And what is worse, losing your life or losing the future? And you are both, so the world and I will need you. From the blocks to the institutions feeling see-through. Cause the real can't be you, that shit is lethal. Don't let them see you bleed, boo. Shine like a star, they'll climb mountains just to reach you. Would've thought you was bilingual cause your second language is to speak truth. Broadcasting the report back, there's no fit, just all facts. Those stories that we held back, we using those for raw stats. Going off wax, my balls blacks, no call facts, what you call that? That short kid on the block had to have hard just to get his ball back. While he sleeps, you can hear cockbacks, it's a war zone, can't stop that. His mom told him never talk back, and you don't wanna know his pop's at. This a report back, this a report back. Giving you all facts, better call smack going off wax. This a report back, this a report back. Giving you all facts, better call smack going off wax. This a report back, this a report back. Giving you all facts, better call smack going off wax. This a report back, this a report back. Giving you all facts, better call smack going off wax.
How could it stay quiet? We pull up cords in a riot. We got that work and they buy it. If you want to say, but then pull up and try it.
Okay, welcome back, everybody. I hope that break gave you a chance to stretch and rest your eyes. We're now transitioning into some discussion. And we have a question here in the Q&A that I think would be a great place to start from. So I noticed that several presenters use the term abolitionist art, abolitionist artist, abolitionist cultural work. And I was wondering if there are differences between these terms or if they're all the same. Is there anyone who'd like to respond to that question?
I can respond to it. I mean, there's no official like difference or definition that I have like learned of, but just like if you say like my thoughts around it is like abolitionist culture worker, like it immediately embeds you within culture and other people and a larger social space for me, versus like an abolitionist artist. For me, like just the word artist doesn't immediately embed you within the larger community.
Any other responses on that one? Well, so I'm wondering if the panelists have any conversations for each other, any reflections or responses to presentations, things that you'd like to hear more about.
So I want to just jump in because I didn't really talk. Imagine that. And part of what I'm attempting to do in terms of this question of abolition art is to figure out how to exercise other resources, right? So at a certain point, similar to what I think you're doing, Ashley. So at a certain point, I don't have to keep repeating the same thing over and over and over again. There's such a cacophony of our voices and our music and our movements that are articulating some of the contradictions and some of the deeper questions that come from abolition, that I'm really intrigued at this point in my work of like doing what Saida Hartman talks about around listening and amplifying, listening and highlighting that which already is. So I want to, I've been thinking about this idea of abolition art, and I'm writing a piece written what I'm calling a black paper on abolition art, in addition with hopefully the participation of other abolitionist artists. And one of the things that I'm trying to put forward, and hopefully we will be putting forward, is this idea of what I'm saying. Ruthie talks about abolition geography. I am talking about abolition art as abolition geography's unruly cousin. So this is the place where it's not just about place, but also about space. And how do we think about the imagination as a space and a landscape that we can traipse through, look at what's in there, and not actually have answers and solutions, right? Somebody asked me to discuss what would happen with a world without prisons. And I was like Black, and I'm a visual artist and a painter and an installation artist. I do painting and installation, visual art, and performance work. But I think the idea of abolition art would describe more texture, more depth in color fields and less representation. So I want to put those ideas out there as a point, hopefully, of entering a conversation with y'all around the idea of abolition art as abolition geography's unruly cousin, a place that lives in Black space, imaginary space, and a place that actually does the work of both demonstrating border crossing as well as discussing border crossing. So that's what my work is attempting to do.
Would anyone like to respond or build on that? I know there are some other projects that people are working on that are seeking to put some more definition or substance into abolitionist art. Ashley or Gloria, want to invite you to offer anything at this moment?
Sure. Well, should I start, Gloria, or do you want to jump in? Okay. Well, yeah, just going back to that first question too, I think about there's lots of discussions about the difference between a cultural worker versus an artist and so forth. But I feel like the most important term in all of the different ones that were laid out there is the abolitionist term, and how that's defined as maybe as not just a kind of like political allegiance or loyalty to a certain set of ideas, but that there's also something attached to it that's thinking about how the work that one does, whether that's art or cultural based work, or if it's political work, strategy, economic work, and so forth. If that what it does is is in some way it seeks to diminish in real terms or delegitimize in cultural terms aspects of the prison industrial complex or a carceral society. So I think I really enjoyed Kate's presentation and as well. Hi, Kate, and good to meet you. And I thought a lot of the questions that the young people were being asked to imagine through those projects and stuff, I think that those, there might be a way in which those things lead to the ending of the ruin of a particular facility or something like that. But there's also the imaginary that question opens that I think is also important, and that also allows us to imagine something else. But in some real terms, in terms of what as artists we have access to as well, Gloria and I have been kind of initiating a group of some like-minded thinkers here in Los Angeles so far, and maybe we're looking for other people who want to chip in or share ideas or maybe join in thinking with us about as artists who have access to different cultural spaces and institutions and learning spaces and so forth, how we might bring abolition not just as a subject matter into those spaces, but also as a set of practices and ways of I mean, protocols like a really official, formal kind of term, but what are kind of ways to respond to things that people who work in cultural institutions actually know about or can learn from abolitionist organizing. So we've been trying to think about so far about what it is that cultural institutions that are kind of art-based institutions, whether they're museums, galleries, schools, etc., what kind of resources they have to know how to deal with things in harm reduction or transformative justice kind of frameworks, rather than turning toward the state or the police or surveillance or security guards and so forth in relation to how they might think about you know, having a safe institution, like how, also thinking about how they know whether or not to think about safety and security, maybe asking that as a site where the idea of security can again be shifted in terms of how people are being asked to inhabit their positions at those institutions. Is there other things you want to add into that, Gloria? I'd love to hear what you think I'm missing.
I mean, I think you touched everything that we have discussed. Maybe the only thing I would add is that it's like back to this thing of like food, like how I was connecting my food justice work to like my abolitionist work, is that some things that have come up to is like, you know, there's things that don't seem like they're important to consider within abolitionist work to somebody who isn't familiar with the work. They sometimes think it's like the main campaign or the main ideas, but we're talking about other ways that like perhaps like, you know, starting like an internship program for young people or people who have come back from prison, or a variety of other ways that we're like building this new land or this new geography or this new imagination. So it's like going above and beyond, and like we're yeah, in general I just feel like we're at a moment where like I'm beginning to question like, are museums relevant now, or and if so, like how are they, how can we make them relevant, or also like can we remember the history where they came from, right? Like the collections of wealthy people became museums. So I'm just kind of at the point where like it's not like what we have is not enough, and an abolitionist vision requires like the actual organizing and movements and campaigns that we're doing, but it also requires like food centers and like access to healthcare and all these other things too. And I want museums to think about and do that and meet those needs too.
Mm-hmm.
I'm intrigued by the idea of what does it mean to not have answers. And I think one of my places, I think as an artist, is to have the space to experiment without having to fix it, right? So going to this root of what are the broad parameters that we can operate around, right? What are the assumptions that we're making? And then how are we working with the contradictions of those assumptions, right? And so what does that end up looking like? When I do think there's this question around protocols, but I also think the piece around art that makes it work for me is the place of experimentation and the place of process, not the place of a solution or a particular object to be either, and I'm a painter, but still, like, I'm not making objects necessarily to sell. So I think art has a range of space, and I'm interested in how, as abolitionists, that question around alternative, where art becomes, where that work of art becomes non-transactional, and which is neither about dollars and cents nor is about fixing a problem, but it's about existing as a mode of thinking and being in the world, right? So I think it goes more into a philosophy than it does a utilitarian practice. So to speak. I'm interested in that place.
Kai, can I ask you a question, or are there other questions coming in?
You asking me, are other questions coming in?
No, I wanted to ask you, Kai, I love what you said, and I think I'm wondering how you think about that, not having utilitarian goals for one's artwork, when when at the same time we're talking about this in relation to activist work where, or in organizing, where oftentimes we think very clearly about utilitarian goals, or at least having particular goals. We want to have wins and so forth. And I think that I think it's really important for us to think about as artists how we can contribute to that. But then I also oftentimes wonder how that can also constrain what you're talking about, the kind of radicality of what you're talking about.
Yeah, I think Elizam Escobar's work, when he talked about, what is that, art of the imagination and art of liberation, art as and the imagination. I can find it in a second. But basically, he made distinctions. Elizam Escobar, in case people aren't aware of this person, is a Puerto Rican artist who was part of the Puerto Rican Independentista movement, came out, I think, Young Lords, and wound up as a political prisoner for decades. And as a political prisoner was also very much developing these ideas around what does radical art mean, and how does that, like, how do we think about our work? And he talks in this essay about going through different phases from the work of propaganda to the work of this art of liberation, right? And so that's not to place a value judgment on them, but to really like clarify what work, if the work is utilitarian, if it's aimed to produce a particular outcome, right, then that work is more in a lot. I think that work disrupts imagination, right? Because it's very much focused on accomplishing something within the frame that we're currently working through, right? So we're not rethinking the frame, right? We're in the box, the fucking Zoom box, but we're not like, and I can put a kaleidoscope and piece of glass on the Zoom box and et cetera, but I'm still working within the frame of this system, whether it's about using the internet, whether it's about the cobalt that goes into these machines that people in the Congo are dying for, or that people, the waste that goes into Dakar and Accra from our machine battery things that we, so there's this place where the art gets stifled and it becomes part of the system that it's operating in. And I just think I want to try to aspire beyond that. I don't know what that means, but I want to work to get out of that.
Yeah, I really love this framework that you're talking about, because I think about this a lot, and that like prison isn't just a systemic problem. Prison is a spiritual problem. It's a psychological problem. It's a creative problem. If we can be making artwork that guides us towards changing the ethos in which we exist and moves us to be able to disrupt the ways that we've come to feel comfortable with a total castration of our humanity. If we can do that work, then it's much easier for us to dream towards a world without prison. But right now, as a result of the violence that, we've perpetrated and experienced generation after generation after generation, there's an inevitability of the systems that are in place and the way that they perform in our society that's really hard for us to dream beyond, because we're so paralyzed by a sense of normalcy in the way that our humanity is so broken. And so I think that I really agree with you with this idea that if we feel as though that we need to be making work that like fits well within the constructs that exist right now on behalf of really specific political like change, it's going to be really slow for us. Like we need to change in much deeper ways.
I wanted to add, or just like some food for thought, or things that are like coming up for me as we talk about this, is that like I like hear you guys and I agree with you guys. And I've even had experiences where like as an organizer, some of my old organizer peers or like whom are still my organizing peers, like telling me like artists should never make art if it's not for like a political movement kind of thing. And me being like, what? Like, that's like a crazy statement that you just said. Like, if I want to make art about an apple or something that's totally not political, or at least obviously political, I'm going to do it. But then I'm also of the train of thinking of like multi-pronged projects, and I feel like critical resistance kind of has this aspect, and other orgs that I know that are like abolitionist orgs, but sometimes they do reform work because like there's people in the inside who are dying, or because there's, you know, some sort of policy that's like killing people or things like that. So for me specifically, like I want to see this like work in this space that is like the space of possibility that does exist outside of the framework that we're in. But then I'm also, sometimes I feel like I earn and get a lot out of being in the framework and seeing what are people's needs, and I'm like, how can I help you, or how can I make my work and my resources relevant to you? So I'm kind of the multi-pronged project kind of area.
Thank you, Gloria. This has been a really good conversation, and like many good conversations, they start going deeper as we've been in the conversation longer together. So I'm going to bring us to a close for today, out of respect for the time that we've been on the computer, and invite you all to follow the work of these folks who are presenting here on the call today. We will share out the video and other materials that were discussed. And this call has also given us maybe some deeper starting points for next conversations. And please follow up with the artists via their websites should you want to engage with people directly on certain thoughts. As a closing, I want to invite Melanie Cervantes to offer to folks who are here on the line any offerings to artists who are just beginning to work with the abolitionist movement, lessons, pointers, or principles. Melanie, is there, can you close us out with some of your wisdom?
Sure. I would say I'll start by giving the advice of like how I started, like, I don't know, 15 years ago working with organizations. And I think, you know, the best way that I could figure out was just volunteering. And I think anytime you volunteer, you bring this, what you're good at, what your strengths are, and kind of like offer that. So I think if there's folks that are participating in the Zoom, this is a great start. It's a great idea. Like if you want to join a CR chapter, if you're interested, or another organization that might be local to you, there's a lot of organizations named throughout the day. I think that's an excellent way to get started. Some of the work, honestly, I think something you were saying, Gloria, about like I think what's often invisible, like I have a sketchbook where I did a lot of the drawings that ended up being used during like a county supervisors meeting. And like that was a really long meeting that, you know, and often like, you know, things get pushed to the very end, you know, especially when we have like a massive number of community members that are there to say like, don't do this or do this. I think in this case, it was the effort to really end the war games that would happen here in Alameda County. Like I did the drawings walls, you know, they're maybe like 3 hours. So I think that way of getting involved in the organizations and engaging in relational ways, you know, this is the part that I think undergirds the multitude, right? Like I think what people are offering, like I was just thinking, we need all of that. We need all of it. And I think one thing that I feel optimism about is that there's now been just like this flourishing of people that maybe hadn't really address it, you know, any of the kind of social issues that are impacting folks, maybe because they, you know, are comfortable with their privilege. But I think the Black Lives Matter movement really helped push people to reconsider their relationship to a lot of things. I think the opportunity now is, you know, will people stay engaged for a longer term? So if there's folks that are interested, that's I think my advice is like get involved with an organization, because it could potentially be a political home for being able to develop your practice. And as you've heard throughout this conversation, there's a lot of different ways people practice their work, you know? So I think that kind of opportunity is there for folks that are committed and who are driven in their heart to do work that will get us all free. I mean, and it's in the everyday. I think like Ruthie talks about, like, it's an act of doing something, of making every day. And so I think in that way, if we're committed to evolution, we are all creating every day, all the time, the world we really want to see, through the remnants of the things that we don't want.
Awesome. Thank you, everybody. There's some nice messages coming through the chat. Appreciate everyone's thoughtfulness and preparation and time and presence today. We will be sharing out the video next week on YouTube. If you have access to Facebook, it will live there, so you can send it immediately to people. And again, an invitation to the rest of the events. In 1 week's time, we'll be having the opening celebration of the auction, which will be a sweet Zoom room celebration with the Bayview Opera House. And before then, there's another artist webinar tomorrow. There's an artist chat later this week. There's so much to engage in. So imaginefreedom.art is the web link. Much appreciation to you all. Thank you for supporting critical resistance, building the abolitionist movement, and we look forward to seeing you next time.